Okay, so in the last episode, I talked about how John used his arm like an antenna. And once again, absolutely brilliant stuff. You know, you see in the self-defense, and I see this a lot now, where I watch a lot of self-defense videos where people send me stuff and they want my opinion on different techniques. And my philosophy, so I'll get this up front, on a lot of these techniques is if you can execute them with utter and complete ruthlessness, and you execute them, you know, in the right time frame, virtually anything will work. And I want to point that because you get these guys out there saying, well, if you did that technique, this is what I would do, or I would do that, or I would do an arm bar, or I would do a block, or I would do a low kick. You know, this is all nonsense because the reality is, unless you have the presence of mind to know they're going to do that, you know, it's going to be hard to deal with unless you train yourself to be able to move a certain way where you can make adjustments as you go along. You know, and so when people say that, they're always missing the context, because I always ask people, what would you do if a guy did this in that situation, you know, whatever situation? My answer is always, what's the context? How does that happen? Because that determines the decision I'm going to make. So John would do something that was very cool, and he even told me this was kind of like when he was a cop. You know, if he was dealing with somebody acting up, you know, he'd always get that hand up, but his hand would always be in a position where not only could he protect himself, but should he have to strike, you got to deal with his hand. And this is important. This is way cool, by the way. It was a part of John's ability to use deception, which will be, you know, a whole series of episodes of how he used deception, because he was just so creative in how he did deceptions. It was unbelievable. This is why you always felt like when you moved with him, you know, like you were in a house of mirrors or something, but you were getting hit. So that's the other problem, right? So John would put his hand out as he moved toward the person. What that also does is it not only gives him a little distance where he can enter where he wants, but now it forces you to have to deal with his hand. He didn't just place his hand in front. He always put his hand in a position whereas if you didn't do something, you're probably going to get hit. In other words, if I'm moving toward Jack and he doesn't do anything, I just hit him. Why? He let me do it. The problem is most people will move, and John understood that. So as I go like this, should he say, go to clear my hand, now that he touches my hand or gets close, well, I feel him doing that, I can just change. Why did he step the way he stepped? Because I forced him to make a choice. Either he makes a choice or he doesn't. If he doesn't make a choice, I hit him. If he hesitates, I hit him. If he moves, I can now play off of that. So say, for example, with your hand, just block this with your hand. Say he blocks it with his hand. Well, the reason his hand is where it is because he tracked my arm in time and space to the place he knew he needed to get in the future to cut my arm off. That's really how we do stuff. It's like how we catch a football, how we catch a baseball, right? So what happens is, now that I forced him to make this choice, because I forced this choice on him, generally speaking, but not always. I'll get into that when I talk later on about how John used to use inverse relationships to movement. I still have one more move. This is why when people say, well, how would you deal with this or how you would deal with that? You know, I realize they're coming from a understanding that really doesn't understand how the body actually moves and performs when we make decisions in the body in microseconds at the subconscious competence level. And you can only make decisions at the subconscious competence level if you actually practice doing stuff to get it to that subconscious competence level by practicing it enough where it becomes ingrained into how you just move as a human being. So as I'm moving with Jack, as I'm bringing my hands up toward his face, the reason why I'm making the decisions I'm making is because he keeps moving the other way. How do I know that? Because I know how long my arm is and I can judge the distance between myself and him. And as my hand goes up, well, okay, he blocked my hand. I know not only blocked it, but I should have already been there. This tells me, oh, okay, this ain't gonna work. So I give it up and then I end up hitting him in the face and, you know, sending him off to the afterlife, you know, with his ancestors and all that kind of stuff. So John would do these things and then he would start adding stepping. And if he started stepping on you, I'm just telling you, it's over for you already. But he would do these things and he would step and throw your timing off and just start leveling you. And the reason was because in doing so and causing you to make a choice, he was now fixing you, but also kind of like what Musashi said, and that is when you make them flinch, you've already won, because he understood if I move and I make you flinch or stop or hesitate, now I've narrowed down the directions where you can go. Any movement you make, and no matter which direction you go, it doesn't matter. If I get you to stop and then you start moving again, it doesn't matter. You don't have enough time because I've already fixed you long enough, whereas I can now anticipate you moving again. And he did this all of the time. One of my favorites, he deleted so much stuff. Whereas he would go like this, and for people who see him, you know what I'm talking about. His hand would come up, and that foot would come up, and you thought you were going to get kicked. And then he would put his foot back down, and it just blast you. And then you feel kind of stupid because I can't believe I fell for that. So you say to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to do that again. So then that leg would come up, you say, oh, he's going to do that thing, and then he would just kick you. And then he would hit you. It's like you couldn't win. You know, you couldn't win because you had to understand he was doing things and making choices in the body because he had developed himself through hook and crook, whatever it was, to a point where he could basically do anything, of course within reason with what his body can do. He could basically do anything he wanted and throw your timing off in any way he wanted. And that was because of the fact that he had trained himself to the subconscious level, conscious level, as I was, to where you could just do these things. In the next episode, I'll get into a little more of this kind of stuff because it's just fun talking about the stuff of how John and Tim did stuff. Because for those who actually had the opportunity and the honor to work with them, it's hilarious the stuff they could do. And it's almost unbelievable when you tell people these stories because of the fact that most people, they just can't move that way.